So hello everyone and welcome to the February 2022 edition of Fiction Fix Online. This event is being live streamed to the Finger on the Pulse, which is the Facebook group for Fiction Fix Online, and the Zoom video will be posted afterwards on my Helen Claire Gould channel on YouTube. Please subscribe and please point all your friends towards it. If you wish to join the Finger on the Pulse, please ask to do so or message me on Facebook to ask for an invitation. Things have changed a little bit recently, but there are still a few rules to review and some questions to answer, but the group is both for readers and listeners. And we have recently changed the group from public to private due to Facebook's new rules, which we're not very keen on, but there you go. At our Fiction Fix live events, there was always a books table. We can't exactly do that with Fiction Fix Online, but for our authors reading this afternoon, please post your book details in the chat and do include your website along with a link to the ebook and or to the seller for the print version. Prices would be helpful and an ISBN or a SIN if you have it. On Amazon Kindle, the SIN that you put in the chat should take the readers straight to the book if they click on it. That's how it's supposed to work. This can be done at the end or at any time during the show when you're not reading, and I will post all the details with the live stream and video or in the comments below it as appropriate. So now, please, would you unmute everybody, because we need your hands to do some work. So Colin is going to start the ball rolling this afternoon with his latest instalment of his ongoing fantasy series, Mylo. So please let's have a big hand for Colin A Brett and Mylo, and please mute yourself during the reading. Thank you so much.
Thank you, everyone. Thank you. Right. As a quick recap, we have two main characters, Mylo, who is the hero of the story, and his would-be girlfriend called Callie. Now, they went out for a ride in the country, found a wounded soldier, were attacked by a bunch of orcs, and sought refuge in the cottage of an old lady who is a local midwife and seer and healer and so on. Now they're preparing for their journey home and all of the trouble that will cause. Mylo held the horse's bridle as he stood waiting for the goodbyes. Callie and Goody Bamba exchanged a brief hug, and the older woman passed Callie a bag laden with food for the journey back to Hessard's Ford. If they could let the horse have its head, they could reach the village in a few hours, but the weather was against them now. The snow had eased while he had groomed and readied the horse, but now larger flakes were falling steadily. He looked about and could see some places were hip deep in snow. He kept a faint hope that, once under the cover of the trees, the snow would be shallower and they might make good progress. In the back of his mind, however, a sound replayed itself. The sound of a hatchet aimed at his head, striking a tree trunk after missing him by scant inches. How many orc raiders were still in the area? Would they resist the cold to carry on raiding? Mylo reckoned that the orcs of the mining towns in the mountains would be taking refuge in their mine works as the men of Hessard's Ford wintered in the inn. The raiders seemed to be a different breed altogether. Were they desperate, like the ravening wolves Callie had described as being painted on their shields? If so, they might be willing to risk battle to gain supplies, in the same way wolves had been known to attack human settlements, risking the pack for a winter's feast of fat, penned sheep. Or, and this thought chilled even Mylo even more than the weather, were the raiders driven by something even blacker than the battle fever Sergeant Astle had described, and Mylo himself had experienced? Mylo was shocked from his reverie as he saw Callie and Goody Bamba break from their talk. Had they seen something in the woods when he should have been on the lookout himself? His hand went to the knife at his belt, but then he saw they were looking back into the cottage. The women caught Sergeant Astle as he almost fell through the door of the cottage. Goody Bamba's choice curses broke the wintry silence, and even through the falling snow, Mylo could see Callie blush. "What in Farmer's name are you doing, man? I ordered you to rest. Get back inside, you fool." The old woman began forcing the sergeant, who was at least a foot taller than she and much more heavily built, despite the weakness his wounds had caused, back into the cottage. "Please, ma'am." Astle began through gritted teeth. "I have something for Mylo." He managed to pull himself upright and stood, swaying on his own 2 feet. Astle lifted his right hand and dim winter light glinted from the hilt of his sword. "Mylo, come here, please." As Mylo shuffled through the snow, Astle reversed his sword and handed the weapon hilt first towards the young man. Milo's eyes widened. "Take it, Mylo. You saved my life, and this sword, which served me well, is yours now." He watched in satisfaction as Mylo gripped the hilt and gently drew the sword from its leather scabbard. "I noticed you cleaned it after your own battle. That's good, Mylo." The sergeant repeated his instructor's lessons. "Always take care of your weapons and armor. If you do, they will take care of you. Fail to repair and maintain your kit, and one day it will fail you. I don't want to see your blood staining the snow, Mylo." The sergeant managed to inject a sternness into his voice, which was broken off with a wince of pain. "That's why I told you to rest, Sergeant," Goody Bamba shouted. "Get yourself indoors." But even she could not disguise the note of pride in her voice. She pushed Sergeant Astle back towards the pallet on which he had slept. The man tried to resist and turned to shake Milo's hand. "In!" Goody Bamba's voice was a screech that the sergeant could not disobey. He managed a weak smile and sank back onto his sleeping pallet. Agnes turned back to Mylo and Callie. "And you two, get yourselves gone from here." She sniffed the air. "I reckon you've got a couple of hours before the snow really starts." Callie looked up at the sky and felt the snow melt on her cheeks. How could it get any heavier, she thought. She hugged Goody Bamba one last time and said, as innocently as she could, "Maybe you should get indoors too." Mylo helped Callie into the saddle and swung up behind her. She wriggled onto the saddle bow, which for the ride today had been thoughtfully padded with a spare blanket. With one last wave at Goody Bamba, who, of course, had not taken Callie's advice, Mylo turned his horse and they set off towards Hessar's Ford. "I can't believe he did that," Mylo said. "I don't deserve to carry this, Callie, let alone use it." Passing on his sword was perhaps the only way he could express his gratitude, Mylo. In my land, that sort of gift would be reserved for his son. Your courage yesterday saved all three of us. Believe me, if not yourself, you do deserve to carry that weapon. Let's hope I don't have to use it, said Mylo sadly, as they reached the eaves of the wood. Duck your head, Mylo whispered. Callie leaned forward over the horse's neck, and Mylo ducked with her. They had just scraped the lowest branches, which were heavily laden with snow. A few paces into the forest, they straightened, and Mylo looked around. The snow was shallower here, as he had hoped, but visibility was poor, maybe 10 or 20 yards at most. It was around noon when they heard the first noises. Callie stiffened and Mylo instinctively pushed the girl behind him. His hand went to the hint of Sergeant Astle's sword and he strained to hear more. There were definitely voices, but he couldn't discern the direction. He padded a few yards away from Callie and the horse and reached a small group of trees. Then he turned and looked back, trying to make it look like he was checking his tracks, when really all he wanted was what might be one last look at the girl. She sat, knife in hand, glancing all around. When her gaze settled on Mylo, she smiled and his heart rose. Mylo turned back to his task. He moved from tree to tree as silent as he could and lost sight of Callie as the wood thickened. Now, however, he had judged the distance and direction to the sound of the voices. 50 yards, maybe, almost directly in front and on the path Mylo had intended to take. The voices were coarse and guttural and were beyond doubt orcish. He crept closer and took cover behind a tree, a tall, solid oak that would stop an axe or crossbow bolt if one came his way. Mylo crouched in the snow and felt this chill seep through his knees, up his thighs and into his guts. Or was that just fear, he wondered, as he peeked around the bole of the tree. Milo's heart sank as he surveyed the sight before him. Over 24 orcs had built a makeshift camp in the woods. Lean-tos had been erected and covered with animal skins and the hacked-down branches of fir trees. He recognized the blackened steel armor they were wearing. 2 of the orcs were squabbling as they built and tried to light a fire over which it seemed they were going to roast the badly butchered carcass of a woodland deer. A third orc had the deer's antlers on his head and was charging back and forth in a drunken imitation of the stag spring fight. A horse was tethered to one side of the camp, and Mylo recognized the breed as being the same as the animal he and Callie rode, except this poor beast was dirty, exhausted, and bore lash marks from the iron-tipped whips. Bastards, thought Mylo. There was nothing he could do here. The rage he felt at the mistreatment of the poor horse and the threat these raiders posed to his home village burned in his heart, but the fire of anger was pointless. One boy against heavily armed and armored opponents, he wouldn't stand a chance. Mylo's blood would stain the snow and the orcs would turn their savagery on Callie. He could not let that happen. Burying his rage, Mylo slipped away from the camp and made his way back to Callie. She saw him emerge from the woods, from the stand of trees, and noticed straight away the look of dejection on his face. Callie ran the short distance to Mylo. She threw her arms about him and hugged fiercely. "Mylo," she whispered, deliberately keeping her voice low. "What did you see? It's them, isn't it?" "Yeah, nearly 30 of them. They camped up ahead just off the main track I wanted to follow." Mylo sighed heavily and tried to remember the area's geography. "We'll have to double back for a while and turn north for a few miles. That'll put some distance between us and them. When we find the river, we can follow it downstream and come to the village from the north." They had reached the edge of the forest and drew to a halt. Mylo, as before, left Callie with the horse and crept forward to gaze over the open lands in front of them. The river's course skirted past the old farm. In fact, if he remembered his father's words from all those years ago, the river marked the edge of their land, or what had been their land, he thought miserably. He waited for a long while and looked for signs of life, but there were none to be seen. Not even a bird flew through the dull grey skies. Mylo heaved a sigh of relief and went back to join Callie. "We'll follow the riverbank downstream. There are enough bushes and stuff to give us cover from prying eyes south of here." Mylo gestured towards the south, in the rough direction of the orc camp. "And if we're spotted, you ride back to the ford as fast as you can," Mylo said grimly. Mylo left Callie waiting under the forest eaves and led the horse down the steep valley side, tethered it to a stunted bush and went back to her. She was shivering with cold and he could see lines of fear around her eyes. "Not far to go now," he said, as reassuringly as he could manage. "It only took a couple of hours when we first came out here, and even being careful, we should be back at the ford just before dark." Callie smiled bravely. Mylo was trying to bolster her confidence, and despite the guilt which gnawed at her for having led him into this nightmare, she felt her spirits rise. Hand in hand, they made their way down the slope. Mylo jumped the last couple of feet, then turned, placed his hands on Callie's trim waist and lowered her gently to the valley floor. After they had walked for about an hour, the steepness of the valley side started to lessen, and Mylo could just see the ruined farmhouse. His heart pined for one last look at his childhood home. He took cover in some bushes and peered through the leafless branches. "Shit!" Mylo hissed. In an instant, Callie was at his side. "Mylo, what's—" She was brought up short as Mylo placed a finger against her lips. Mylo turned and looked back at the farm, and Callie followed his gaze. She felt him tense up beside her and understood why as she saw black armored figures in the ruins. "They're there," Mylo said, his voice hoarse as he tried to control his anger. "What are they doing? Don't they know they caused enough damage all those years ago?" His right hand went unconsciously to his left hip and gripped the hilt of Sergeant Astil's sword. His sword now, and Mylo was determined these orc swine would feel it. Callie had kept herself in check and gripped Mylo's shoulder. She could feel the tension in his muscles and feared rightly that he wanted to spring forward and attack. "They're looking for something," she whispered, just managing to keep her voice calm enough to restrain Mylo. "There's nothing there, Callie. Everything was looted or destroyed 10 years ago." Mylo closed his eyes against the tears he could feel welling up. Callie moved her hand from his shoulder and slipped her arm around him. What are those animals doing to my home? He opened his eyes, and even though through the tears blurring his vision, he noticed what the orcs were doing. They were scrabbling around near the remains of the farmyard fence, flinging handfuls of snow and frozen earth into the air. Oh no, the graves! They're digging up my parents' graves. Thank you.
Okay, well, please unmute yourselves now. It was a very exciting ending and sinister ending, actually. So Colin is my long-time Fiction Fix collaborator, so many thanks to him for that. And please, would you make some more noise again for Colin A Brett and Mylo?
Thank you.
Oh. So, Colin, over to you.
Right. Oh, excuse me, I'm sorry. Now, today we have one new reader for you, all the way from America, and 3 returning examples of homegrown talent. We also have 3 new novels featured this time. Our second reader this afternoon is David, whom Helen has known since the 90s when they were both in the same Orbiter. That's a postal writing workshop in SF circles. David has started a publishing company for children's fiction, Sergeant Frosty Publications. In just over a year, the company has moved from publishing ebooks to publishing print books, thereby achieving David's next goal. So please, put your hands together for David Flin and Walkies with Watson.
Right, David.
Okay. Walkies with Watson. It's one of 3 books in the trilogy, or a collaboration, 3 murder mystery book stories in the murder mystery anthology. I'm trying to get it shown there. Walkies with Watson takes the basic premise: Sherlock Holmes is a man, Dr. Watson is Sherlock Holmes's best friend, a dog is man's best friend. You can see where this is going. In chapter 1, Holmes and Watson go out for a walk, and Watson comes back with a stick that turns out to be a walking stick, as dogs do. And that's where we pick things up. Chapter 2. A stick leads to a case. The doorbell to 221B Baker Street rang. I barked at the door so that Holmes would know that it had rung, because those are the rules. The door rings and I bark at the door. There might be a case or an intruder. Answer the door, Holmes called out. What did he think I was doing? The doorbell was ringing and I was answering it as loudly as I could. I paused for breath and barked even more loudly. Then Mrs. Hudson came down the stairs. She spoke quite firmly to Sherlock Holmes, who ignored her. He was busy playing the violin, or perhaps it was shooting a gun at the wall. I always get those 2 mixed up. Whichever it was a horrible noise. I answered the door again loudly. Then Mrs. Hudson opened it and allowed the man inside. I knew it was a man because he was wearing trousers. It's one of the rules that 2 legs have, except in Scotland, of course. What a fine dog, the man said. Is he an Afghan? It's a confounded nuisance, Mrs. Hudson said. You're here to see Mr. Holmes? That's very observant of you, Dr. Watson. I wasn't expecting Dr. Watson to be a woman, he said. I am not Dr. Watson. I am Mrs. Hudson. That is Dr. Watson. Dr. Watson. It's Mr. Holmes's joke. And he's got a bad shoulder, poor boy. I followed as the man was shown in to see Mr. Holmes. "Do sit down, Dr. Mortimer," Holmes said. The man paused in mid-movement, mouth agape. "How on earth did you know my name?" Holmes smiled. This was his party trick. Like my trick was being able to chase my own tail and knock over large amounts of furniture. "It's quite straightforward," Holmes said. "It's clear from the way that you walk that you have an injury to your leg and you normally use a stick. You don't have a stick. You do have a number of dog hairs on your trousers, and their height suggests that it's a dog on the larger size. Not a wolfhound, but maybe the size of an Afghan. You're clearly a medical man. The distinctive stain of iodine on your finger marks you as such. From your accent, you've clearly been resident in London for some time, but have recently moved to Devon. A medical man leaving a London hospital, such as Charing Cross Hospital, for the country may very well be given a walking stick as a leaving present from the colleagues. Given that I have such a walking stick, which I deduce belongs to you, and hence you must be the Dr. Mortimer referred to on the stick. Astounding! I feel more confident I have been for some considerable time. Tell me about your case, Dr. Mortimer, Holmes said. That was my cue. Holmes had performed his party trick. It was time to perform mine. I grabbed my tail in my teeth. I was so excited about this case. Dr. Mortimer talked a lot about curses and the curse of the Baskervilles and old family homes and stuff from the past and things that Mr. Holmes understands. Dr. Mortimer said only two interesting things. He said that Dartmoor was a great place for long walks and probably had great smells and wildlife to chase, and that there was a ferocious hound on the loose. "Is the hound a bitch?" I asked. I knew what was important, and my last marriage hadn't lasted. Not after that unfortunate incident at Epsom, chasing that two-legs who wanted to be able to vote. They both ran onto the racetrack, and the horses, well, it was grim. I hardly think that would be relevant to the case, Holmes said. What won't be? Dr. Mortimer said, sounding confused. Maybe not for the case, I said to him, but details are important. I suspected that I'd find out in the course of this case. Holmes and Dr. Mortimer kept on talking and talking and talking. Chapter 3, A Threatening Message. The next day, Dr. Mortimer came back. This time he had a friend, Sir Henry Baskerville. I don't know much about people, but Mrs. Hudson offered Sir Henry tea. In a cup. Yuck. Not even in a bowl. At least Holmes had the common sense to pour tea into the saucer and claim that it brought it to the right temperature. I didn't like Sir Henry. He had a rolled-up newspaper with him. I don't like rolled-up newspapers, so I turned my back on him. Then Dr. Mortimer gave me a biscuit. Naturally, I wagged my tail in thanks. That's only polite. It was a mistake that anyone could make. I knocked Sir Henry's teacup over and straight into his lap. Serves him right for not drinking it properly out of a bowl like normal people. Of course, I politely tried to correct matters by licking him dry, but he didn't seem to appreciate that. Then he showed Holmes the newspaper, which had holes in it. He also had a piece of paper with bits of the newspaper stuck to it. Stuck with paste, Sir Henry said. I wasn't having that. I knew gum when I smell it. Gum, I barked. Gum, said Holmes. It has a distinctive aroma to the trained nose. Typical Holmes. Repeats what I say and pretends that it was his own idea. Still, that's what masters do. As you value your life or your reason, keep away from the moor. Holmes had read out the note. Why is more written in ink when the rest is cut from the paper? How could two legs be so stupid? Holmes said, because it's probable the word more was not in the paper. Oh, I hadn't thought of that. I thought they'd run out of gum. I suppose that's why Holmes is the detective. Dr. Mortimer and Sir Henry left. Holmes got a lead, and we hurried to watch them go. Holmes wanted to follow them at a distance. Easy, I just needed to follow the smell of the man with tea on his trousers. Holmes didn't want to follow too closely. He wanted to see who else was following him. My master is a great detective. I'd follow him anywhere. Oh, look, a cat. Chapter 4, A Journey to Dartmoor. I'm afraid I shall be detained in London for a few days, Holmes said. I howled in anguish. I knew what that meant. He was going to go down in disguise. He might fool two legs. He was good with voices and the look. He never did anything about the smell. As soon as they sniffed him, no person could mistake him for anything other than who he was. But the two legs were always fooled. They just don't know how to use their noses. It's like how they have no idea how to lick faces properly, and they never go around sniffing each other's bottom when they're meeting for the first time. Except in the Travellers' Club, of course. Mrs. Hudson will travel down to Baskerville Hall and send the reports back. Sir Henry looked worried. A woman travelling alone? Two legs do have this strange way of seeing women differently to men. Maybe that will change in the future. Holmes looked surprised. She won't be travelling along, Sir Henry. Dr. Watson will be with her. Send a hound to catch a hound. But Dr. Watson is a dog, not a hound. Sir Henry and Dr. Mortimer started arguing about whether I was a hound or a dog. Never once thought to ask me, although they kept saying my name. After a bit, whenever they said my name, I would bark the answer as loudly as I could. I'm a purebred mongrel. My father was an Afghan and my mother was a saint. Holmes sighed. A Saint Bernard, he said. I barked in appreciation that he remembered. Of course he remembered. He was my master. He was Mr. Holmes. Then Mrs. Hudson put my bowl down. I left Holmes and the others because I could smell that this was an especially fine meal. Thank you.
Oh.
Please unmute yourselves now and let's hear it again for David Flynn and Walkies with Watson. That sounds like an exciting story. I love The Hound of the Baskervilles.
Hey. Okay, right, so and now we welcome back Jackie, who is one of our returning performers who has a new book out. This is in the Witchlight series, and that book was followed by Old Light. Jackie has been involved with Fiction Fix for a long time and used to read from her work when we were based at the Draper's Arms, and later at Sam's. So we've kind of seen those, you know, the whole series unfold really while we've been doing Fiction Fix. So will you please make some noise for J.S. Watts and her latest novel and the latest in the Witchlight series, which is called Elderlight. Thank you all so much for muting yourselves during the reading.
Thank you all very much. As Helena said, I'm going to be reading from Elderlight, which is the third and final book in the Witchlight series. And notice I write under the name J.S. Watts. As Helen's also noted, I have read bits of Elderlight, albeit in draft form, at Fiction Fix before. So I was debating kind of what to read. I've already read the opening of the novel, albeit so many years ago, most people have forgotten. And I thought about reading from further into the book, but there are murders in Elderlight, and I didn't want to offer up any spoilers. So in the end, I've decided I'm going to pick up from the end of chapter 1 and then sag into the beginning of chapter 2 when we first come across the phenomenon that is Elderlight. I think the only things you probably need to know to put it into context is that the hero of the book is Holly Beldam, who is a witch of quite considerable power. She can tap into the old magic that is a natural phenomenon. And she has, by the Elderlight book, become the chief librarian for the British Coven. The British Coven's library is conveniently underneath the British Library in Euston Road, if you happen to know where that is. She has a very interestingly shaped 5-sided office with lots of different doors and windows overlooking totally disparate views at totally different heights, so from underground to overground. And at the end of chapter 1, she's in the office meeting with another Coven elder, a woman known as Caprice Graham, also known as Crimson Caprice because of her fascination with the colour red. And Caprice and Holly have been discussing some vexing points of Coven politics, which are not really going the way things should be. At which point, the entirety of Holly's office was suffused with a pulsing blood red light. Holly looked at Caprice. "Your work?" she said tartly. "Just because it's red doesn't mean..." Anything further Caprice said was drowned out by the loud tolling of a deep sonorous bell. In total, it tolled 6 times, slowly. When silence finally resumed, the red light pulsed a further 3 times and then faded away. "Oh shit," exclaimed Caprice. "We've just lost an elder." Holly's office felt unnaturally silent after the echoing clanging of the alarm bell. The crackling of the log fire seemed somehow subdued, and even Caprice's brief expletive and the following ambiguous statement did nothing to lessen the grip of the weighted silence. What finally did for the thick hush filling the room was the repeated heavy banging on the office door leading to the library reception area. The banging, thankfully, was relatively short-lived. Holly glanced through the glass panel, saw the cause of the loudly reverberating noise was Marcus, the head receptionist, and immediately invited him in, opening the door with a single wave of her right hand. Marcus spilled forward into the office. "Are you all right? We could see that grisly light from outside, and Friedrich must have heard something. He started whining and I wouldn't stop until that awful light went out. What was it? What happened? Is everyone okay?" The Friedrich referenced in Marcus's verbal splurge was a miniature schnauzer, and Marcus's beloved familiar. He was currently sitting bolt upright in Marcus's arms and looking all around with wide and rather nervous dark eyes. "We're both good, Marcus. Thank you for checking. Apparently it was some sort of alarm. Elder Graham knows something about it." Holly turned quizzically towards Caprice in expectation of an explanation. Caprice, to Holly's surprise, shook her head. "You see, that's why I don't like this office. Everybody can see everything. Some things are designed for elders' eyes and ears only. Sorry, but I'm not going to explain to him what he shouldn't have seen in the first place." Holly wasn't at all comfortable with this, but before she could say anything, Marcus shrugged and responded, "Well, okie dokie then, as long as everyone's okay. That was all I was worried about. Friedrich and I will get back to our lowly duties, and from here on in, we will make sure we only look at what we're allowed to see." To Holly alone, he said, "Give me a shout if you need anything, Holly." And with that, Marcus, with Friedrich still in his arms, exited the office, shutting the door firmly behind him. Holly turned back to Caprice. "That was rude. Marcus was only trying to help. So, are you going to explain things to me, or am I not on your need-to-know list too?" "I can explain briefly. You are an elder. We will, however, need to get moving very shortly. The elder light is a summoning as well as an announcement." "Elder light?" "The pulsing blood red glow we've just experienced. It's both an announcement that an elder of the coven is dead and a summoning call to the rest of the inner coven." "So when you said lost just now, you meant deceased as opposed to missing?" Of course. Holly wasn't convinced there was an of course to it, but didn't say anything because there are other questions she wanted to ask. So why the elder light now? Elder Hearn passed away last year, and I don't recall any strobing blood patterns decorating my office then. Yes, but he died from advanced old age and way too much bought. The elder light is only triggered when an elder dies suddenly and from unnatural causes. Holly paused briefly while she considered this. Unnatural causes? As in murdered? As in murdered? Or suicide? By witchlight? Given the potential seriousness of matters, Holly felt she needed to double check the obvious. So you're saying that one of the inner coven has just killed himself or been murdered by another witch? Do we know who's dead? Yes and no, which is why we are about to leave your office by that door. Caprice pointed decisively at the closed, solid mahogany door on the wall behind the aerial view of London and the crackling log fire, and then walk very quickly along the corridor behind it to the grand hall so we can find out for ourselves what has happened, who has died, and how. Wouldn't it be quicker to transport straight there? Yes, but until we know where the death took place, how and why, I, for one, am not transporting sight unseen anywhere, and certainly not into an area about to be heaving with the magically gifted when it was possibly one of us who did it. Putting it that way, replied Holly, shall we walk? She now pointed towards the door, which immediately swung open, revealing a gloomy, windowless corridor lined with what looked like Victorian gas lights, but which were burning brightly with witchlight rather than gas. Holly and Caprice walked swiftly through the door and along the corridor. It was wide enough for them to walk comfortably side by side. They talked as they walked. So, am I right in thinking you've experienced elder light before? Asked Holly. 10 years ago, back in 2007, there was an incident. As you know, I wasn't an elder then, but as the coven's sole principal assistant, I was included in the elder light manifestation. It was triggered when Elder Laycock drowned. Drowned? That doesn't exactly sound like a magical death. He was in the middle of his dining room at the time and nowhere near water or any other fluids. Turned out he drowned in a rather expensive Pinot Noir from the inside out, as it were. You mean he drowned in a really good wine without the benefit of tasting it? Correct. It's especially cruel. How did that happen? The murderer was his wife of 98 years. It was a long marriage, and the passage of time had apparently worn away any love. She'd finally grown tired of his many little hobbies, which included much younger women, wine collecting, and excessive drinking. Something, no one was quite sure what, finally made her snap. Anyway, she drowned him slowly, but steadily, across a period of a week. Her witchlight wasn't sufficiently strong to enable her to do it all at once. Plus, by topping him up slowly but regularly, he didn't realise his growing lack of sobriety. Not that he would have done anyway, by all accounts. That way, she kept him too drunk to notice until the very end that he was also drowning. She told everyone he had magic-resistant flu, and people put the breathlessness down to that. She made sure he was on his way for the final top-up and on his own. It was cleverly done. But you caught her out. Not me personally, but the Coven Inquisition did a thorough job. I helped them a bit, of course. That was my job, but they found the evidence. They proved it was her. Okay, so that's the history. But how does elder light work? And of course, if you want to find out how elder light works and more about it, you can buy the book. Thank you very much for listening.
Okay. Oh, sorry about that. Yes, so please unmute yourselves now, and will you please put your hands together again for J.S. Watts and the latest addition to the Witchlight series, Elder Light.
Thank you.
I really love that slightly sarcastic sort of way that you present this, Jackie. I think it works really well, particularly for the subject. You know, it just seems. Well, I was sitting there giggling away to myself. Really.
That's good to know.
Yeah. Okay, so over to you, Colin.
And now we come welcome the return of Marise, our second returning reader. She has a follow-up novel to Songs of Symerid Three out. Please mute yourselves during the reading, but for now, let's join Marise Morland as she takes her series to the next level with her second novel, The Synectic Snare.
Right, I'm starting reading at chapter 3 of the Synectic Snare. Celestriad is under occupation, and Laura, newly returned from Earth after several years, is stranded with her lover Edenian at a riverside mill. Edenian steered her into an adjoining room. It had a connecting door, which he'd noticed earlier. The radio was clearly audible through the thin panels, and Edenian repressed a shiver as he recognized the voice of Governor Axmuir. Another victim of madness, Firessa Raxel. Beware this woman, she's crafty. We prevented her from reaching the Oldomexa spaceport, but she eluded capture and stole a boat from the marina. You, Con, will assemble your staff and wait for personnel from the Etis South Mill, who are already on their way by river. Together, you will form the 10. A collective sigh rose from the 5 Narvellans. We believe Firessa is making for the spaceport at Kest. You should be able to intercept her near your location. Any questions? None, Lord Axmuir, Con answered steadily. Then do your duty. Unhesitatingly, Con and the others turned and left the room in single file. Laura hastily ducked behind some furniture as their silhouettes passed the outer door, but Edenian didn't bother to hide. He could have leapt in front of the Narvellans and called them names. There would have been no recriminations. Nothing would have diverted them from their dreadful purpose. Where are they off to? Laura asked tremulously. He translated what he'd heard. They're going to perform an execution, he added bleakly. But, Laura stammered, those men are just ordinary workers. Individually, yes. Edenian opened the door and went to the gallery's edge. The execution squad was just filing out of the main hall. They're heading for the landing stage. Come on. Surely you're not going to follow them. Edenian looked unusually stern. Know thine enemy. Isn't that what your people say? Who knows when you'll have another chance to observe the 10 in action? You think the Narvellans are a bunch of irritating bureaucrats, and you're wrong, so wrong. Then, as she hesitated, believe me, they won't take any notice of us, even if we're seen. Who's this woman they're hunting? Asked Laura, falling into step beside him. Do you know her? I've heard of her. She's a biologist. And she isn't mad. No, not mad, Edenian said softly. Free. They halted in the shadow of a boathouse. They could see Quan and the others near the water's edge, silent and still. Perhaps, presently, a small hovercraft came into view. It carried no navigation beacons, and its engine was a mere purr. It swirled to a halt before the waiting assembly, and 5 more Narvellans stepped out. The 2 rows of men stood facing each other, wordless, motionless. Laura couldn't read the lethal build-up of power in their linked minds, but all at once she felt leaden and ill, as if every scrap of hope and joy had been smothered within her. The night seemed to grow darker. Edenian drew a shuddering breath and held her very tightly. Then, breaking the tableau, the 10 Narvellans boarded their vessel and drifted away. Shall we go back now? Suggested Laura in a very small voice. You sensed it, didn't you? Edenian responded equally quickly. And they haven't yet killed. I hope they're far from here when they do. They retraced their steps toward the main entrance. Away from its circle of light, the unfriendly stars glinted like crystal splinters. Can any Narvellan be conscripted into a 10? Laura asked. Anyone, and not allowed to refuse. And the victims are always their own people? So far, Edenian confirmed as they neared the threshold. Suddenly, a figure detached itself from the surrounding darkness and clutched at him, a Narvellan woman in a mud-spattered overall that had once been white. She was limping badly, leaving Laura in no doubt that this was the renegade Firessa. First poet, she cried breathlessly. Where have they hidden your spacecraft? It isn't here, Edenian stammered, taken aback. You lie, Celestrian, she snarled, raising her hand as if to strike him. I heard the report. You stole it and landed here. I didn't land here. Edenian was genuinely distressed. The sphere's 4 or 5 Silmai downriver. I have to find them, Firessa sobbed. Don't you understand? I have to find them. He tried to pacify her, then flinched as an icy pool nudged the edge of his shielded mind. The 10's focus had left the vizier and swung back in his direction. They were still testing their range, but they knew their prey was close. Firessa was staring at Laura. Clemoridis, she murmured incredulously. Then, with more assurance, Clemoridis. The 10's chilling scrutiny returned and stayed. Run, Edenian cried. Firessa, run. I have failed, she said, quite calmly. But she ran back towards the river. Edenian stared helplessly after her until she vanished into the darkness she'd come from. She was drawing the 10 away, to a distance where their death bolt would cause him no pain. What's Clemoridis? Asked Laura. My name for you in a poem, Edenian said wearily. Yes, she knew who you were, but it doesn't matter. She's as good as dead. And what did she mean? I have to find them. I wish I knew. Edenian resumed walking. Let's go inside. We can do nothing for her. Silently, Laura followed him back to the restroom. It no longer seemed too hot. They waited, clinging to one another like lost children, until presently Edenian said, It's over. Why, Edenian? Why are they doing this? He faced her earnestly. Laura, my own love, when we meet with Travar tomorrow, when your alias is established, we'll tell you everything. Until then, it's safer not to discuss it. Thank you.
We wish you the best of luck with the new novel, Marise. Please unmute yourselves now and give another round of applause for Marise Morland and the Synectic Snare.
Right, and now for our newest reader, and we do like to ring the changes with our readers' genres. So I want to introduce our newest reading member of the Finger on the Pulse, Rachel Abigov, as she brings us an extract from her romantic novel, Maddie and Mo Get Married. It's due to be published on February the 22nd, and it will be available here in the UK as well. So romance readers, do support it. Many thanks for muting yourselves during the reading. Right,
Thank you.
Rachel.
Okay, thanks everyone. February is Romance Month, Valentine's Day coming. So I'm going to be reading you from my latest kissing book, Maddie and Mo Get Married. A little bit of backstory. We first meet Mo in a previous novel of mine, Crimson and Clover, where he's the brother of the hero. He was such a compelling character that he needed to be the hero of his own book. So here he is. And let's do this. Okay. I have a little sign above my coffee maker that says rise and grind. That's not only my motto, it's also my coffee maker's. It grinds the beans fresh every morning, and it works with the precision of the Swiss railroad, unless there's a power failure. If that happens, you don't wake up to the delicious aroma of fresh coffee. Your cat thinks that you're dead, and since dead people can't serve kitty kibble, it's okay to start eating your face. Not today, Satan, not today. You finally get to the office, take out coffee in hand. You're ready to dive into the mountain of work ahead of you when Nick, your assistant, comes into your office with a distressed look on his face, saying, Maddie, I mean Ms. Bennett. Then he stops, doesn't bother finishing his sentence. He doesn't even breathe, because behind him is the guy who was my first meeting of the day. He's been waiting for 30 minutes, 35 minutes actually, because he came early, which is a sign of respect. Meeting dude takes a look at your takeout coffee cup and says, latte factor, cool, I know the owner. Before he can launch into a description of how, why, and how long he's known her, he plunks himself down in my visitor's chair, the one I draped my jacket on, as opposed to the empty one, and looks at me expectantly. My prospectus, he says, we're here to discuss your prospectus. Of course, that's all I have time to say before the cuff on my shirt wings the edge of the coffee cup, knocking it and its contents all over my desk, my tablet, and my lap in decreasing order of importance. Not the look of power someone in my position likes to present. Meeting dude grabbed a roll of paper towels and started swabbing up the coffee from my desk. I was tempted to squeeze the paper towels into my mouth. That's how badly I needed the caffeine. While we were both mopping up, our hands touched. I felt a distinct tingle as his hand grazed mine. I tried to blame it on the static from the carpet. Nice try. Meanwhile, Nick had procured 2 cups of fresh coffee. I knew it was supposed to be one for each of us, but that didn't stop me from wanting to bogart that second cup. After my caffeine fix, I could change into my gym clothes, which were dry and didn't smell of mocha java. I also needed a fresh copy of the infamous prospectus. Briefing notes for the meeting would have been even more helpful. Like, who was Maurice Mayfield? And why did he find it necessary to sit on the chair with my jacket draped on it instead of the other chair? Was this the kind of guy I wanted to do business with? He was just another hot guy with a custom-made suit and matching attitude. Mindful moment time, Maddie. Take a deep breath. Enjoy the aroma of the coffee, the rich, dark brown color, the curlicute kernels of cream floating on the surface like tadpoles. The what? Oh, hell no, this wasn't happening. I'm so sorry, I said, grabbing the coffee from my guest before he had a chance to ingest the noxious brew. We don't usually serve spoiled dairy to guests. Good to know. He glanced at his watch pointedly. Time was money, and I was wasting both. Let's discuss what you want out of this arrangement, I said, steepling my fingers and leaning back in my chair. Cold hard cash, he said, deciding whether to mirror my posture or not. He didn't. I want to expand my business, and it seemed like we'd be a good fit. I had my financial team draw up the prospectus, which should probably be recycled if you can't salvage it, and here we are. Yes, here we are. Pardon my fugue state, I mumbled. This is what happens when I don't have my coffee. Okay, he said. I thought he'd laugh sardonically or at least chuckle, but he wasn't feeling it. If things went any worse, I'd lose my job, my apartment, and everything I possessed by noon. That's what happened to women who owned my favorite coffee shop, and it took her a while to regroup. I could handle it. I could handle anything, but I didn't want to, not when I worked this hard to get here. I did what anyone would do in my position. I texted the executive producer of Raven's Roost and arranged for Maurice Mayfield to be on the show, taping the day after tomorrow. That got him out of my hair and gave him a lengthy list of urgent things to do to prepare for the big day. Once he'd been dispatched, I chugged the black coffee, changed into my gym clothes, and got to work. Rise and grind, Maddie. Rise and grind. On the set, things were going swimmingly, literally. The first pitch was for a set of state-of-the-art floaties for kids. After hearing the stats about childhood drownings, Daniel was ready to invest. He was the nice Raven, and I would have been surprised if he passed on this deal. That segment took up half the morning because of the time needed to set up the inflatable pool and fill it with water, then drain it and mop up the spillage. There's a lot of hurrying up and waiting when you're filming a TV show. Next, we had the owner of a chain of MMA gyms. I knew nothing about MMA except for the fact it was big business. The pay-per-views netted millions of dollars. I hated everything about it. When you're clobbered as a kid, you can either develop an affinity for it or you can run in the opposite direction. No prize for guessing which camp I fell into. And as our theme music, along with the sounds of flapping of wings and cawing, filled the studio, the doors opened, revealing none other than, wait for it, Meeting Dude, aka Maurice Mayfield. Did I mention he was only wearing boxing trunks? Did I mention that he had more muscles than my fellow Raven Kenya Hawkins new influencers? And did I also mention that she was looking at him as if he was the most delicious snack she'd ever seen? This is insane, I said, hoping the comment would be edited out of the segment when it aired. I gotten to see this guy in an office setting, and if I had just the slightest inkling as to what was lurking underneath the conservative gray suit and tie, I would have just thrown all my money at him without batting an eyelash. Every instinct in my body was telling me that I had to make this deal, or it would be the death of me. Then he smiled straight at me. I thought at first that it was the studio lights, but no, it was his smile that was blinding me. Uncharacteristically, I was smiling back. What the hell? I never smiled on camera. I was known for my RBF, that's Raven Bitch Face. It was a meme. He stepped forward on cue and launched into his spiel. Hello, Ravens. I'm Maurice Murderface Mayfield, and I'm here to ask for $500,000 in exchange for 10% of my chain of MMA gyms. We want to help everyone awaken their inner warrior. I'd like to give you a demonstration. I need someone with the heart of a champion. Mad Dog, would you like to join me? I kicked off my shoes and sprinted to the display where an octagon had been set up. Maurice Murderface Mayfield was gentlemanly enough to hold the ropes, so I could climb in with ease. Thank goodness I was wearing a pantsuit. I could only imagine the wardrobe malfunctions, stressing the plural, that would have happened if Kenya in her skin-tight cocktail dress had been invited to join him. She was drooling so much that I was tempted to reach for the sample of the floaties, but they'd been removed from the set. Fortunately, the other Ravens were familiar with his athletic exploits. He'd introduced himself as Maurice when we'd met, added, my friends call me Mo. I was relieved that I wasn't expected to refer to him on camera as Murderface. I would have laughed too hard to be able to continue with the segment. Okay, Mad Dog, I'm going to show you a few basic moves, said Mo. I watched as Mo did a roundhouse kick. I duplicated it to the best of my ability, but my impeccably tailored pants were not built for such efforts. Should I change into gym clothes? I think we'll have a much better segment, I offered. No, Maddie, laughed Chandra, the camera person. It's much more fun to see you in your business suit. That's what the audience wants. Give the people what they want, shrugged Mo as he did another move. I imitated it, and for a moment, I thought I'd end up being flipped on my back, which was tailor-made for great television and would make me look like a good sport. Unfortunately, that didn't happen. Mo applauded my efforts with more enthusiasm than was warranted. The other Ravens followed suit, and he held the ropes again so I could extricate myself safely. We took a 2-minute break so I could chug some water and have my hair and makeup touched up. Cameras rolling again, we started the negotiation. That was a lot of fun, I said, very empowering. Glad to hear you say that, said Mo. People need to tap into their power. Too many things can happen to take your power away. Like, let's say somebody's day was ruined by a bad cup of coffee. Smooth move, mentioning bad coffee. He winked at me and continued his pitch. The idea is that even after a bad coffee day or a bad hair day, they can come to one of my gyms, our gyms, and get rid of their stress. Daniel cleared his throat. I'd completely forgotten the other Ravens were there. I can't get past the fact that a half-naked man is in front of me. Kenya giggled, then wrote something in her notebook and tore out the page. Was she going to slip this guy her phone number? Oh, hell no, not on my watch. I prefer to think of it as half-clothed, I said, in as firm a voice as I could muster. I'm going to make an offer, Mr. Murderface. I'll give you exactly what you asked for, but I want to see the studies about the fall prevention program, and I'd like to offer that part of it to assisted living facilities to make sure that everyone can benefit. You're getting the power of a Raven as a strategic partner if you agree to my terms. Whoa there, Maddie. You're not the only Raven who wants to make an offer, said Daniel. I'll go in with Ethan, but we'll need 50% equity to make it worthwhile. 2 Ravens could really blow this thing up. And we'd like to involve wounded veterans in some way. Maybe a special training program? Dominic Catelli was signaling something to Kenya. They were about to pull a power move. Not going to happen. Nobody got the best of Mad Dog Bennett. I cleared my throat. Hey, Mo, I was the first one to make you an offer. It was exactly what you asked for. The question is, do you want to work with me or not? I think Mad Dog and Murderface has a nice ring to it, but it's entirely up to you. The clock is ticking. I smiled as I glanced at my Cartier tank watch. I gotta respect a woman who knows what she wants, said Mo, coming over to my chair to shake my hand. Mad Dog, we got ourselves a deal. I'd won. At least I thought I'd won. Part of me was triumphant. The other part of me was wondering what the hell I got myself into.
Wow. Yeah. Wow, that is a little bit different from a lot of the romance books that I've read in my misspent youth. So, yeah. So please unmute yourselves now and please show your appreciation for Rachel Abogov and Maddie and Mo Get Married.
Thank you.
Thank you so much, Rachel.
And now,
My pleasure.
And now, Helen will end our session with the reading from the Zardoth Imperative Clanship. We're still in chapter 9, a lot happens there, and following his arrival with the other children in Deris labor camp, Ayar's father Lomar meets some of Ayar's friends, and it doesn't always go smoothly. So, over to Helen.
Thank you so much. Right. Right. Okay, so yes, this is a continuation of chapter 9, which I read from last time. Ayar introduces his father to his friends from Earth. And there's a couple of things I need to give you a heads up about before we start. JSEP stands for the Joint Space Exploration Programme, which is the Earth Space Programme. And Vudak is Zardothi for a warrior. Here, Father, I want you to meet some people who've helped me a lot. Ayar noticed Lomar's translator was switched off. Lomar heaved himself up off the sand. Who are they? Come with me. Oh, and why don't you turn your translator back on? You won't know their language. Don't you bother listening to the Kiai now. With the translators, we soon picked up with their language and Declaney, though they don't have much to do with this after our failure to release them. Lomar flipped the catch on his translator as Ayar led him over to the tiny group of humans. These are my friends from Earth. He introduced Edith Chappere and Josie Carter and to Lomar. They looked after us on Earth before and after we were fostered. The two women offered him their own versions of the Zardothi handclasp. Lomar looked surprised. Josie looks timid, he murmured to Ayar in Zardothi. She isn't. Don't dismiss either of them. They both fought hard on our account, with the authorities, with a couple of the foster families, with Project Security, and even the world president. Besides, Edith has a translator and knows exactly what you're saying. I was just... Ayar made the facial expression for keep quiet. Then turned to Robert and introduced him next. Where's Halka, Robert? Talking. Family. Speech set off Robert's cough till he gasped for breath. Sorry. Atmosphere, he choked out. Ayar put his hand on Robert's back and rubbed it. The spasm passed. I'm so sorry, Robert. We shouldn't have persuaded you to come. Robert dismissed the comment with a wave of his hand. Wouldn't let Halka leave me behind. Of course not. Rest now. Ayar rubbed Robert's back again, then supported him as he sank onto the ground. And this is my friend Eddie. We worked together for a while. Eddie gave Lomar a confident thumb clasp. Ayar was pleased to know. Did you say Eddie was your engineer? Yes, on the way here, but Eddie's job on Earth was to strip down the Bakel and find out what makes it tick. I worked with him for some time after Hardy brought me back from Russia, IR explained. Lomar looked thoughtful. Who runs this compound? IR asked. A Ki by the name of Chabu Restik, the chap who came out and spoke to Chanig when we did our exercises this morning. Oh, I know who you mean. What's he like? In other circumstances, I think he'd be a decent man, but he runs the firing squad for executions and organises games from time to time. You mentioned them yesterday. What are they? They're a way of whittling down sick and injured captives periodically and providing entertainment for the Voth. It's a good way to control the captives as well, since the penalty for insurrection is either the firing squad or the games. Lomar's gaze swept over IR and Eddie. Of course, that means they have to replace them once they've gone. You're probably here as replacements. So you might survive the mines and the steel plant for a few years, but they'll get you in the end. Eddie's voice was flat. Something like that. Lomar's voice matched his. What's the setup here? I asked. The Voth pretty much leave the Ki to run the installations on the ground here, since it's harder for them to get around on sand, whereas the Ki have proper feet like us, adapted to walk on various surfaces. If the Voth want to move about, they have to extrude pseudopods. I'd say it's quite a weakness. Yes, IR murmured and thought hard. So are the Ki keen to revolt, do you think? Wouldn't you be? I certainly would. I didn't notice their tolerant attitude to Lucy and Myrrel. They were going to shoot Lucy just because she's a kid. Eddie's tone was indignant. But they didn't, IR pointed out. They let her run messages and errands instead. You could have left her and Myrrel in the sleep room, Lomar suggested. We were going to, but the Ki boarded us before we could get everything set up. Eddie pulled a face. I don't know that they'd been safer on board than with us. Lomar turned to Eddie. IR said he worked with you on the Bakel. Yes, stealing our technology so that IR had little choice but to give it away. Eddie shrugged. I can't deny that, and I lost my family because of it, but we're back together again here. He looked directly at Lomar and dislike burned in his eyes. IR is a good lad. He made a difficult choice in the situation, and I, and many of our colleagues, might think he made the right one. We respect him for it. Well, I suppose you would, since it gave you what you wanted. Eddie shook his head. Not just that, Lomar. It gave IR what he and his friends needed too. Eventually, they were able to allowed to communicate and meet again, and the older ones joined JSET. What's that? Eddie explained. Without that decision, none of us would be here now. He paused for a moment, then added in a softer voice, we came to rescue you. Don't think badly of IR. His courage and determination brought the Bakel back here. You admire him for what he did? Very much so. As young as he is, he knew his duty was to his clan and you, above all. He could have stayed on Earth, lived amongst us and served in the space program that marooned him on our planet, but his vision was to rescue you. And you think he's done that? Lomar searched Eddie's face. Not yet, but the Bakel isn't the only ship up there. There are at least 2 more. I'm sure their crews know what's happened by now and intend to break the Voth hold on this planet. How compliant do you think the Ki are with Voth demands? IR interrupted. Lomar shrugged. There are rumours of a high-level coup attempt, but no sign of it so far. A coup? As in the slaves are revolting? Eddie asked. Lomar nodded. Which ships? He swung round to face IR. Aftars and Vagars, and if we can persuade them, there are 3 Earth ships that might side with us, at least temporarily, IR replied. A look of concentration spread over Lomar's face. That might just swing the odds in our favour. He's calculating them, I realised. My friend Hardy, if he's still alive, came down here to find out what was going on. He rescued me when I lived in Russia. If I know him, he'll have contacted Afdar and Omar. Wait, rescued you? Is there something else you haven't told me, IR? He explained that the new Luddites had kidnapped him, with a few interruptions from Eddie to fill in background information. At the end, Lomar asked, "Why didn't you tell me this before? It wasn't the best time when I just turned up and told you about Mother and you were upset about both those things," IR said. Lomar's face wore that look of concentration, calculation almost, again. "And this friend of yours, who is he?" "Hardy? He's JSEP security, specifically anything to do with us children after we arrived on Earth." IR stopped and thought hard for a moment. He's an excellent Vudak father. I asked him to teach everyone to shoot, Edith, Juliet, Josie and Lucy included, on the way here. He did a brilliant job. Oh, and Chan, she's a close combat martial artist, Earth style. She took the exercise class this morning. Yes, she trained everyone as well on the way here. I remember her from the ship. She was just a kid. Lomar paused. So you didn't come without a plan then? I didn't have a specific plan because I didn't know what I'd find when I arrived here, but I did prepare as best I could. Hardy helped me too. IR sighed. He's a survivor. He'd think of a way out of here. I wonder where he is right now. Thank you so much.
Yeah.
Colin?
Thank you so much, Helen. Events begin to play out in the camps from now on, so keep listening. Now, please put your hands to work again for Helen, Claire Gould and the Zardoth Imperative clanship.
Thank you very much. So I hope all you fab listeners enjoyed all of that. And many thanks to all our lovely authors and readers. That's David, Jackie, Marise, and the newest member of the gang, Rachel, for joining Colin and myself. And thank you so much to all our lovely friends and family, studio audience, for joining us and supporting our readers today. If you'd like to stay and join our chat with the authors after we finish, you are most welcome to join us. That part won't be recorded or streamed, so if you put your video off, you can safely put it back on again once I stop the stream and the video recording. And authors, if you haven't yet done so, please include links to your books in the chat or send them to me after, and I'll post them on my timeline, in the Finger on the Pulse, on my YouTube channel, Helen Claire Gould, and on my website, www.zardoth.com. Do include prices, ISBNs or ASINs, stockists, national, international and local, and your websites too. On Sunday, the 20th of February, as I mentioned earlier, Jackie and another long-time fiction fixer, Debbie Daly, will be joining me at Iron Horse Ranch House for an afternoon book signing. If you live locally, why not join us? It should be a fun afternoon with live readings through the afternoon, held in a fab American diner. What could be better than that? So bye till next month. And this has been Helen Claire Gould and Colin A Brett jointly comparing Fiction Fix online and bringing both new and established writers in various fiction genres to your attention. Thank you so much for joining us. The next edition is on Sunday, the 6th of March at 4 p.m. until around 5 p.m. And we look forward to catching up with you then. So bye for now.
Thank you. Bravo.
Right.